The most terrifying thing about betrayal is that sometimes the person planning your funeral is still kissing you goodnight. I learned that at exactly 2:13 in the morning, standing barefoot at the top of my staircase with one hand pressed against the wall to stop myself from collapsing. The house was dark except for the faint amber light glowing from the kitchen downstairs. Rain tapped softly against the windows while our grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loud enough to sound like a countdown. I remember every detail because fear burns moments into your memory like photographs. My name is Emily Carter. I am 41 years old, born and raised in Connecticut, married for 16 years to a man I believed would protect me until my last breath. Funny how life changes in the span of a single sentence. I woke up that night with a migraine pressing behind my eyes hard enough to make me nauseous. Jason had gone downstairs maybe 20 minutes earlier, saying he could not sleep and wanted water. I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me while cold November rain rolled across our bedroom windows. Something felt wrong before I even left the room. Maybe wives develop instincts the same way soldiers develop reflexes. Quiet changes become alarms after enough years. I slipped out of bed carefully, wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself, and padded toward the staircase. That was when I heard her laugh. Vanessa Blake. Soft. Low. Familiar. The kind of laugh that suddenly makes your own house feel unfamiliar. My stomach tightened immediately. Vanessa worked with Jason at the marketing firm downtown. 23 years younger than him. Blonde hair, polished smile, expensive perfume that always lingered too long after company dinners. I told myself for nearly a year that I was imagining things whenever she touched Jason's arm too casually or smiled at him a second longer than necessary. Women are trained to ignore their intuition because the truth usually hurts more than denial. I reached the last step and stopped in the darkness beside the hallway entrance. The kitchen lights were dimmed low. Jason stood near the island counter with one hand wrapped around a whiskey glass, while Vanessa leaned against the sink wearing his gray college sweatshirt. Bare legs. Wine glass dangling loosely from her fingers. Comfortable. Too comfortable. My husband looked at her the way men look at futures they already chose. Then Vanessa said the sentence that turned my blood cold. By Christmas, she will be gone. Everything inside me froze. The rain outside suddenly sounded louder. Jason exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of his neck. Nervous habit. I had watched him do that during tax audits, hospital visits, and once when our son broke his arm in Little League. Are you sure nobody will question it? He asked quietly. Vanessa gave a small shrug before sipping wine. Heart complications happen every day, especially with her medical history. My hand slipped against the wall beside me. Heart complications. My migraines. The medication Jason started reminding me to take every night 3 months ago. The same pills Vanessa once casually mentioned during dinner because she used to work as a nurse before changing careers. Suddenly, every tiny detail inside my marriage rearranged itself into something horrifying. Jason stepped closer to her and lowered his voice, but I still heard every word. Tomorrow night, he murmured. We do it tomorrow night. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might faint right there on the hardwood floor. 16 years of marriage, and I suddenly understood that the man downstairs did not love me anymore. Worse, he was waiting for me to disappear. Vanessa reached up and touched his face gently. Then we can finally stop hiding. Jason smiled. Smiled. The same smile he used when kissing my forehead before work every morning. The same smile in our family vacation photos hanging upstairs beside pictures of our son at graduation and Christmas mornings and beach trips that suddenly felt fake enough to belong to strangers. I wanted to scream. Wanted to run downstairs and demand answers and throw every glass in that kitchen against the wall until the whole illusion shattered. But fear does strange things to people. It does not always make you loud. Sometimes it makes you deadly quiet. I stayed perfectly still in the darkness while my heartbeat slammed so hard against my ribs I thought they would hear it downstairs. Vanessa leaned closer to him again. The insurance money clears fast once everything is finalized, she whispered softly. Insurance money. My mouth went dry instantly. Jason stared into his whiskey for a second before nodding slowly. Tomorrow night, he repeated. Then my hand brushed against the small decorative table beside the staircase and knocked over the framed family photo sitting there. Glass shattered across the hardwood floor like a gunshot in the silence. Jason's head snapped toward the hallway immediately, and suddenly my husband was staring straight into the darkness where I stood frozen. Jason moved toward the hallway, so fast his whiskey glass nearly tipped over onto the counter. I instinctively stepped backward into the darkness near the staircase while my pulse hammered against my throat hard enough to make me dizzy. For one terrible second, I thought everything was over right there, that he would look directly at me and realize I heard every word. But fear sharpens people, especially women who suddenly understand survival depends on staying calm. I bent quickly, picked up the fallen picture frame from the floor, and forced my voice to sound sleepy instead of terrified. "Jason," I called softly. "Did something fall?" His silhouette appeared at the edge of the kitchen light a second later. Even from across the hallway, I could see the tension in his shoulders. Vanessa disappeared somewhere behind him out of sight. My husband stared at me for a moment too long before his expression softened into something familiar. Concern. The performance almost would have worked if I had not heard him discussing my death 30 seconds earlier. "Emily," he said quietly, walking toward me. "You scared me." Funny. I almost laughed at that. I tightened my grip on the broken frame while forcing my breathing to stay steady. "I knocked this over," I whispered. "Migraine again." Jason's face changed instantly at the word migraine. Not fear for me. Calculation. Once you see the truth, every expression starts translating differently. He reached for my elbow gently like a caring husband helping his exhausted wife back upstairs. The same hands that held another woman in my kitchen moments ago now rested softly against my skin. "You should be sleeping," he murmured. "Did you take your medication tonight?" There it was again. The medication. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might be sick right there on the hallway floor. I nodded slowly without meeting his eyes. "Not yet." Jason glanced briefly toward the kitchen before lowering his voice. "I will bring it upstairs for you." Behind him, I caught the faint outline of Vanessa standing partially hidden near the refrigerator. She looked pale now, nervous. Her wine glass no longer rested comfortably in her hand. Good. Let her panic too. I forced myself to yawn lightly like a woman too tired to notice betrayal unfolding 10 feet away. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I did not realize you had company." Jason gave a small laugh that sounded almost normal. "Vanessa stopped by after the fundraiser meeting ran late. Lies arrive so easily once people stop respecting you enough to tell the truth." I nodded again and turned carefully toward the staircase. Every step upstairs felt unreal. My own house suddenly seemed dangerous in ways I could not fully process yet. The family photos lining the hallway walls looked like evidence from someone else's life. Beach vacations in Cape Cod. Christmas mornings beside oversized trees. Jason kissing my cheek at our vow renewal party 6 years earlier, while our son Tyler laughed in the background, holding champagne glasses for the toast. 16 years of memories, and suddenly every one of them carried a question mark. By the time I reached our bedroom, my hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the dresser to steady myself. Rain continued sliding softly across the windows while headlights from passing cars moved faintly across the ceiling. I stared at the orange prescription bottle sitting beside my bed and felt something cold settle deep inside my chest. The pills Jason reminded me to take every single night. The pills Vanessa once recommended after casually asking about my migraines during dinner last spring. "You should really stay ahead of stress-related symptoms," she told me with professional concern while refilling my wine glass. God, how long had this been happening? I heard Jason's footsteps coming upstairs a minute later. Calm, measured, familiar. The footsteps of a man walking toward his wife carrying poison disguised as care. I slipped beneath the blankets quickly and closed my eyes just before the bedroom door opened. Jason entered quietly holding a glass of water and the prescription bottle in his hand. "Hey," he whispered softly. "You awake?" I forced my eyelids open slowly like someone half asleep. He sat beside me on the mattress and brushed my hair gently behind my ear. The tenderness almost destroyed me more than the betrayal itself. "Take these," he said quietly, shaking 2 pills into his palm. I stared at them resting against his skin while every instinct inside me screamed not to touch them. But panic would get me killed faster than anything else now. Jason studied my face carefully, watching, waiting. I forced my hand not to shake as I took the pills from him. "Thank you," I whispered. His expression softened again. Perfect husband. Perfect liar. I lifted the pills toward my mouth slowly while Jason watched me under the dim bedroom lamp. Then I pretended to swallow. I kept the pills hidden beneath my tongue until Jason finally kissed my forehead, and rolled onto his side of the bed. Then I lay there motionless beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing slow into the steady rhythm of sleep, while my entire body shook beneath the blankets. The digital clock beside the bed glowed 3:17 in cold blue numbers. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, but inside our bedroom the silence felt heavier now. Dangerous. I waited another 20 minutes before slipping carefully out of bed and locking myself inside the bathroom. My reflection looked unfamiliar beneath the pale vanity lights. Blonde hair tangled from sleep. Mascara smudged faintly beneath terrified eyes. I opened my trembling hand over the sink and stared at the 2 white pills resting against my palm. Tiny. Ordinary. Harmless looking. That was the terrifying part. Evil rarely arrives looking monstrous. Sometimes it arrives in prescription bottles beside your toothbrush. I wrapped the pills inside toilet paper and shoved them deep into the trash beneath old makeup wipes and tissues before gripping the edge of the sink hard enough to whiten my knuckles. My husband wanted me dead. Even thinking the sentence felt unreal. Jason Carter. The man who cried holding my hand during our son's birth. The man who built a treehouse in our backyard one summer because Tyler once casually mentioned wanting one after seeing it in a movie. The same man, now discussing insurance payouts with another woman in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. I splashed cold water across my face and forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic would make me sloppy. Sloppy women end up buried beside secrets nobody investigates closely enough. By morning, I had already made my first decision. I would tell nobody until I understood everything. Not Tyler away at graduate school in Chicago. Not my sister in Vermont. Nobody. If Jason suspected I knew the truth, whatever plan they built around tomorrow night could change into something worse. So I smiled at breakfast. That was the first truly terrifying thing I did. Jason stood at the kitchen stove flipping pancakes while sunlight spilled softly across the counters like any ordinary suburban morning. Coffee brewed. The dishwasher hummed quietly. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked behind white fences while sprinklers clicked across perfectly trimmed lawns. The world looked painfully normal. Jason glanced over his shoulder and smiled warmly when he saw me enter. Feeling better? He asked. Perfect husband voice. Calm. Concerned. I poured coffee into my favorite blue mug and forced myself not to stare at him too long. Much, I answered softly. My voice barely sounded like mine anymore. Jason carried 2 plates to the table and kissed the top of my head while passing behind me. I nearly flinched. Good, he said. I hated seeing you sick lately. There it was again. Sick lately. Reinforcement. Narrative building. Suddenly I noticed how often he mentioned my health these past few months. How many times he suggested more rest. More medication. More doctor appointments. Vanessa had even recommended specialists twice during dinner conversations. God, how long had they been preparing this? I cut slowly into my pancakes while Jason scrolled casually through emails on his phone beside his coffee mug. Every movement looked ordinary until I remembered what lived underneath it. Big day today? I asked carefully. Jason shrugged lightly. Just meetings. Vanessa is helping finalize the Hartford campaign. Vanessa. He said her name naturally, comfortably, like hearing it should not hollow my chest out from the inside. You two work together a lot lately, I said. Jason looked up briefly before smiling again. She is ambitious. Funny word. Ambitious. That was one way to describe a woman researching medications for your husband. I nodded quietly and lowered my eyes back to my plate before he could study my face too closely. Across the kitchen wall hung our framed family photographs. Beach vacations. Ski trips in Vermont. Tyler's high school graduation. One picture stopped me cold. Jason standing behind me at our 15th anniversary dinner last year with his arms wrapped around my waist while I laughed at something outside the camera frame. Looking at it now felt like staring at evidence from someone else's marriage. Emily. Jason's voice pulled me back instantly. You okay? I realized my fork had frozen halfway to my mouth. I forced a small smile quickly. Just tired. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. Warm skin. Familiar touch. Calculated intimacy. Maybe take your medication earlier tonight, he said softly. The words slid through me like ice water. I looked down at his fingers resting against mine and suddenly understood something important. Jason believed I was already weak. Predictable. Trusting. That mistake might be the only reason I survived what came next. After he left for work, I stood alone in the silent kitchen listening to the ticking wall clock while sunlight moved slowly across polished countertops. Then I walked upstairs, locked the bedroom door, opened Jason's desk drawer, and found the life insurance policy within 3 minutes. The insurance policy sat inside Jason's desk drawer beneath old tax documents and expired warranties like it belonged there naturally among ordinary things. $2 million. My name listed under insured party. Jason listed as sole beneficiary. Policy updated 4 months earlier. I stared at the paper while cold sunlight spilled across the bedroom carpet, and something inside me quietly changed shape. Fear was still there. Heavy. Suffocating. But now it had direction. This was not paranoia anymore. It was planning. Real planning. I lowered myself carefully into Jason's desk chair and kept reading every page while the grandfather clock downstairs echoed through the silent house. Coverage expansions. Accelerated payout clauses. Additional accidental death rider. Every sentence felt colder than the last. Then I found the medical authorization forms attached near the back. My signature stared up at me from the bottom of the page. Except it was not mine. Close enough to pass quickly. Wrong enough that I knew immediately Jason signed it himself. My mouth went dry. He had already crossed legal lines long before whatever they planned for tomorrow night. Suddenly, I remembered Vanessa sitting beside me during a charity dinner 3 months ago, asking strangely specific questions about my migraines. "Do they ever make your heart race?" she asked casually while swirling white wine inside her glass. At the time, I thought she sounded concerned. Now, every conversation replayed differently in my head. Every smile, every recommendation, every moment Jason insisted I take better care of my health. I forced myself to breathe slowly and photographed every page with my phone before sliding the policy exactly where I found it. Precision mattered now. Men like Jason only stay calm while they believe they control the story. By noon, the house smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and roasted coffee from the automatic machine Jason programmed every morning before work. Normal smells. Safe smells. That was the disturbing part. Horror inside suburban marriages rarely arrives with screaming. It arrives quietly between folded laundry and grocery lists. I spent the afternoon pretending to be myself. I answered emails, folded towels, watered the plants near the dining room windows while soft instrumental music drifted through the speakers Jason installed last Christmas. Meanwhile, my mind kept replaying one sentence over and over. Tomorrow night. We do it tomorrow night. Around 3:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Seeing her name on my screen nearly made me drop the phone. "Thinking about you. Jason said your migraines are getting worse. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the message while nausea rolled slowly through my stomach. The cruelty of it almost impressed me. Concern wrapped around manipulation so carefully most people would never see the difference. I typed back slowly. "That is sweet. I am feeling better today." 3 little typing bubbles appeared immediately. Good. Stress can be dangerous for women our age. Women our age. Vanessa was 33. Young enough to weaponize youth without realizing age eventually comes for everybody. I locked my phone without answering and stood motionless in the kitchen while rain clouds gathered outside the windows again. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Last month, Jason insisted on changing pharmacies because the service was better. The same week, Vanessa conveniently mentioned knowing someone who worked there. God, the whole thing stretched farther back than I realized. That evening, Jason came home carrying flowers. White roses. My favorites. He kissed my cheek gently while I stood at the stove stirring tomato soup, and for one dangerous second, grief hit harder than fear. Because part of me still remembered loving him. Real love does not disappear instantly just because betrayal arrives. Sometimes it lingers like smoke inside burned houses long after everything collapses. "You look better today," Jason said warmly while loosening his tie. Maybe the medication is finally helping. I forced a tired smile and lowered my eyes toward the soup simmering softly beneath warm kitchen lights. Maybe. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and rested his chin lightly against my shoulder. Familiar intimacy. Practiced tenderness. My body nearly stiffened before I forced myself to stay relaxed. "I made reservations for tomorrow night," he whispered. "Just us. Anniversary dinner." There it was. Tomorrow night. The words slid coldly down my spine while rain began tapping softly against the kitchen windows again. Jason kissed the side of my head gently before reaching for a spoon to taste the soup. "Need salt," he said casually. I stared at him standing there in our kitchen wearing the blue sweater I bought him 2 Christmases ago and suddenly understood something terrifying. Jason truly believed he would survive this. He believed he would cry at my funeral, collect insurance money, move Vanessa into this house eventually, and continue living beneath the same roof where he planned my death over soup and flowers and anniversary reservations. The sheer normalcy of evil almost broke me more than the betrayal itself. Later that night, while Jason showered upstairs, I walked quietly into the garage and opened the old storage cabinet near the workbench. Inside sat Tyler's forgotten camping equipment from college trips years earlier. Flashlights, batteries, portable chargers. Beneath everything else rested a small digital voice recorder we once used during a family road trip to capture vacation memories. I held it in my hand for several seconds while cold rain rattled softly against the garage door outside. Then I pressed the power button and watched the tiny red recording light blink alive in the darkness. The recorder fit easily beneath the stack of cookbooks on the kitchen shelf beside the dining area. Small enough to disappear, close enough to capture voices clearly if anyone stood near the island counter. I tested it twice while Jason slept beside me upstairs later that night, pretending to scroll through recipes on my phone while my hands quietly shook beneath the blankets. The tiny red light blinked steadily in the darkness like a heartbeat. Evidence. Real evidence. For the first time since hearing them downstairs, fear loosened its grip just enough for strategy to breathe underneath it. Morning arrived gray and cold with low clouds hanging over our neighborhood like wet cotton. Jason kissed me goodbye before work and reminded me twice to rest because of my health issues. Every word sounded rehearsed now, like he had already practiced explaining my death to sympathetic neighbors over casseroles and folded hands. "Do not forget your medication tonight," he said while adjusting his tie near the front door mirror. I made our anniversary reservation for 7:30. I smiled softly and touched his arm like the trusting wife he still believed I was. I am looking forward to it. The moment the front door closed behind him, I locked every entrance in the house and called Claire Monroe. Claire had been my closest friend since college and one of the sharpest estate attorneys in Hartford. We once stayed awake until 3 in the morning drinking cheap wine and debating whether women ever truly recovered from betrayal. Funny how life circles back to unfinished conversations. She answered on the second ring. "Emily." Her voice immediately sharpened. "What is wrong?" I almost broke apart hearing genuine concern after 24 hours surrounded by lies. But I forced my voice steady. "I need you to come over, and I need you to come alone." By 11:30, Claire sat across from me at the kitchen table while rain slid slowly down the windows behind her. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The conversation, the insurance policy, the medication, the forged signature forms. Halfway through, Claire's face lost all color. "Emily," she whispered carefully, "have you gone to the police?" I shook my head slowly. "Not yet." "Why not?" I looked toward the staircase instinctively even though the house was empty. "Because if I am wrong, I destroy my marriage." Claire stared at me for several seconds before answering softly. "And if you are right?" Silence filled the kitchen. The clock above the stove ticked loudly while coffee cooled untouched between us. Finally, I reached into my cardigan pocket and placed the 2 pills from last night onto the table. Claire looked down at them with growing horror. "I need proof first," I whispered. "Real proof." Claire leaned back slowly in her chair and rubbed both hands across her face. "Jesus, Emily." Rain tapped harder against the windows outside while cold wind rattled the patio furniture softly across the deck. The whole house suddenly felt less like a home and more like a stage set where everyone except me already knew the ending. Claire spent the next 2 hours helping me quietly move pieces into place. Copies of financial records, updated wills, emergency account transfers, digital backups uploaded into encrypted storage. Every click of her laptop keys sounded unnaturally loud in the silent kitchen. Survival has paperwork. Nobody tells women that part. Before leaving, Claire grabbed both my hands tightly across the table. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "You do not eat or drink anything tonight unless you prepare it yourself. And if anything feels wrong, you call 911 immediately." I nodded once. "Come outside." Terror underneath. After she left, the house fell silent again except for rain and the refrigerator humming softly in the kitchen. I wandered slowly through each room, noticing things differently now. Jason's shoes beside the entryway. his reading glasses folded neatly on the living room side table, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in our bathroom. Ordinary details become haunting once trust dies inside them. Around 5:15, my phone buzzed with a message from Jason. Cannot wait for tonight. You deserve a beautiful anniversary. Attached was a photo of our reservation card beside candlelight and champagne glasses already arranged at the restaurant. I stared at the image for a long time while cold unease spread slowly through my chest. Beautiful anniversary. Tomorrow night. We do it tomorrow night. My eyes drifted toward the small recorder hidden on the kitchen shelf. The red recording light still blinked quietly beneath the cookbooks. Then another message appeared, this time from Vanessa. Hope you are feeling stronger today. I looked at her words while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the rain outside. Stronger. Such a strange thing to say to a woman they expected to bury by Christmas. I locked my phone slowly and glanced at the dining room clock. 14 hours earlier, I was a wife with migraines and an ordinary suburban marriage. Now I was a woman secretly preparing evidence against the man sleeping in my bed. And somehow the most frightening part was realizing how calm I had become. By 6:45, the restaurant glowed like every expensive anniversary commercial Americans are taught to associate with successful marriages. Soft amber lighting, white tablecloths, jazz humming quietly beneath the low murmur of wealthy couples pretending happiness over wine and candlelight. Rain streaked gently across the tall front windows while valets hurried through the cold outside, carrying umbrellas over polished black cars. Jason held the restaurant door open for me, with one hand resting lightly against my back like the devoted husband he had perfected becoming. You look beautiful tonight, he whispered as we followed the hostess deeper into the dining room. I wore the dark green dress he once said made my eyes look younger. Funny how memory weaponizes ordinary compliments after betrayal. Thank you, I answered softly. My voice sounded calm, now almost automatically. Somewhere during the last 24 hours, terror had transformed into focus. Jason pulled my chair out for me beside the window, overlooking rain-soaked Hartford streets below. Candles flickered gently between us, while a waiter poured sparkling water into crystal glasses that reflected tiny moving lights across the tablecloth. Everything looked cinematic, elegant, deadly. Jason smiled warmly while loosening his cufflinks slightly. 16 years, he said softly. Can you believe that? I looked at him across the candlelight and wondered how many lies a face could hold before collapsing under their weight. Sometimes it feels longer, I replied quietly. He laughed at that. Real laughter. Comfortable laughter. The sound nearly hollowed me out from the inside. My phone rested silently inside my purse beneath the table. Claire already had copies of everything. The recordings, the policy photos, the forged signatures. Earlier that afternoon, I also emailed the files to Detective Dean Walsh, an old family friend Tyler once called Uncle Dean during Little League summers years ago. Dean's reply came 27 minutes later. Do exactly what I say tonight. Stay calm. We are watching this closely. Watching. The word gave me just enough strength to walk into this restaurant smiling beside the man discussing my death 2 nights earlier. Jason lifted his wine glass slightly toward me while candlelight flickered across his face. To us, he said. Such a simple sentence. 2 tiny words carrying enough poison to ruin entire lives. I touched my glass lightly against his without drinking. To us. Dinner arrived in polished silence, broken occasionally by soft piano music drifting from somewhere near the bar. Jason spoke naturally about work projects and holiday plans, while rain rolled steadily down the windows behind him. Watching him perform normalcy so effortlessly became almost hypnotic after a while. He asked about Tyler, about my migraines, about whether I wanted to visit Vermont after Christmas. The man planning my funeral still remembered to ask if I wanted dessert. Halfway through dinner, Jason reached inside his jacket pocket and placed a small velvet jewelry box onto the table between us. My stomach tightened instantly. Open it, he said softly. Inside sat a delicate gold bracelet with tiny emerald stones matching my dress. Beautiful, expensive, carefully chosen. I stared at it while nausea crept slowly upward through my chest. Jason, I know things have felt difficult lately, he interrupted gently. Your health, the stress. I just want us to reconnect. There it was again. Health, stress. The narrative always circling back exactly where they needed it. I force myself to smile faintly while fastening the bracelet around my wrist. It is beautiful. Jason looked relieved hearing that, like passing another checkpoint inside a plan already scheduled down to the minute. Then his phone buzzed against the table. One quick glance. Vanessa's name reflected briefly across the screen before he flipped it face down again. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Strange. I expected fear tonight. Instead, everything felt unbearably clear now. Jason noticed my eyes flick toward the phone and smiled casually. Work emergency. I nodded once. Of course. Outside, thunder rolled faintly beyond the rain while headlights smeared across wet streets beneath the restaurant windows. The waiter returned carrying dessert menus along with a fresh bottle of wine Jason apparently arranged beforehand. Your husband requested this vintage specifically for tonight, the waiter said politely while pouring deep red wine into our glasses. Requested specifically. Planning again. Jason waited until the waiter disappeared before lifting his glass toward me once more. One more toast, he said softly. Candlelight danced across the wine between us while the restaurant hummed quietly around our table. Somewhere behind the elegant music and polished silverware, I suddenly became aware of how isolated we really were. Just me, Jason, Rain, and whatever he believed would happen before the night ended. I wrapped my fingers carefully around the stem of my wine glass without lifting it. Jason smiled patiently. Waiting. Watching. Emily, he said gently. Then my phone vibrated inside my purse. Once. Short. Deliberate. Dean's signal. I looked down briefly at the screen glowing beneath the tablecloth. 3 words waited there in cold white letters. Do not drink. The text message stayed glowing beneath the table while candlelight flickered softly between us and rain slid down the restaurant windows in silver streaks. Do not drink. 3 simple words somehow steadied my pulse instead of accelerating it. Across from me, Jason still held his wine glass raised slightly in the air waiting for our anniversary toast like a patient husband inside a life that no longer existed. I smiled gently and lowered my hand toward the table instead of lifting the glass. Actually, I said softly, my stomach has been strange all day. I should probably skip the wine. For the first time all evening, something sharp flashed behind Jason's eyes. Not panic exactly. Disruption. A plan interrupted. He recovered quickly though. Men like Jason survive because they know how to perform calm under pressure. Of course, he said warmly, setting his own glass down untouched. Your health comes first. Health again. Always health. Somewhere deeper inside the restaurant, silverware clinked against plates while a jazz singer's voice drifted softly through hidden speakers. Around us, couples laughed quietly beneath golden lights, completely unaware that my husband might have been preparing to explain my death before midnight. Jason reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. You seem nervous tonight, he murmured. I looked at his fingers resting against mine and suddenly noticed how cold his skin felt. Do I? A little. He smiled softly. You can tell me anything, Emily. The irony nearly made me dizzy. Before I could answer, movement near the front entrance caught my attention. 2 men in dark coats stepped quietly into the restaurant, followed by a woman carrying a leather folder beneath her arm. Detective Dean Walsh walked slightly behind them, wearing the same calm expression he always wore during Tyler's Little League games when parents screamed at umpires over harmless calls. Jason followed my eyes toward the entrance and frowned slightly. Do you know them? He asked. One of them, I answered quietly. Dean scanned the dining room once before his eyes settled directly on me. Then he nodded almost invisibly. Showtime. I slipped my hand gently away from Jason's and reached inside my purse. Actually, I said softly, there is something I need to share with you tonight too. Jason leaned back slightly while confusion flickered across his face. I placed my phone onto the table between us and pressed play. At first, only static filled the tiny speaker beneath the low restaurant music. Then Vanessa's voice drifted quietly across the candlelit table. By Christmas, she will be gone. Jason froze instantly. Every bit of color drained slowly from his face, while his eyes locked onto the phone like he no longer recognized the world around him. The recording continued. Are you sure nobody will question it? His own voice answered softly through the speaker. Nearby conversations began fading one by one as people at surrounding tables noticed something unfolding beside the windows. Jason reached suddenly toward the phone, but stopped himself halfway there when Dean approached our table with the other officers. "Evening, Jason," Dean said calmly. The restaurant had gone nearly silent now, except for rain against glass and Vanessa's recorded voice continuing softly from my phone speaker. "The insurance money clears fast once everything is finalized." Jason stared at Dean in complete disbelief. "What is this?" he whispered hoarsely. Dean placed a sealed evidence envelope carefully onto the table beside the untouched wine glasses. "That depends," he answered evenly. "Would you like to explain the forged medical authorization forms first, or should we start with the altered prescriptions?" Jason's entire body went rigid. Around us, forks lowered quietly onto plates while strangers tried unsuccessfully not to stare. Public collapse always arrives slower than movies suggest. It happens expression by expression, breath by breath. Jason looked at me then for the first time all evening, without performance covering his face. No warmth. No husband smile. Just fear. Real fear. "Emily," he whispered. I held his gaze steadily across the candlelight while the recording continued playing softly between us. "Tomorrow night. We do it tomorrow night." Hearing his own voice repeat those words inside the restaurant seemed to break something in him completely. Jason buried one trembling hand against his mouth, while Dean signaled quietly toward the officers standing nearby. "Vanessa Blake was taken into custody 20 minutes ago," Dean said calmly. "She is already cooperating." Jason closed his eyes instantly like the sentence physically struck him. Cooperating. Funny word. People betray each other fastest once consequences arrive. The waiter who served our anniversary dinner stood frozen near the bar, clutching a wine bottle against his chest while rain thundered harder outside. Jason looked back at me again, and suddenly tears filled his eyes so quickly it almost startled me. "Emily, please," he whispered shakily. "You do not understand." That was the moment I finally realized something important. Jason never believed I would survive long enough to fight back. He spent months planning my ending without once considering I might become the author instead. The restaurant emptied around us slowly after Dean escorted Jason toward the front entrance. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. Couples stared down into untouched desserts and half-finished wine glasses, while waiters moved carefully through the silence like people inside a church after bad news. Rain hammered harder against the windows now, washing Hartford in silver reflections beneath streetlights outside. I stayed seated at the table long after Jason disappeared through the doors because my legs suddenly felt disconnected from the rest of me. The adrenaline, keeping me upright for 2 days, had finally started leaking out of my body all at once. Dean returned about 10 minutes later carrying his coat over one arm. He lowered himself quietly into the chair across from me where Jason had been sitting earlier and studied my face carefully. "You okay?" he asked softly. Funny question. I looked down at the untouched bracelet still wrapped around my wrist, while candlelight flickered weakly across the emerald stones. Jason gave it to me less than an hour ago while planning a future that did not include me surviving the week. "I do not know yet," I answered honestly. Dean nodded like someone who understood more than he wanted to. Vanessa gave a statement. My eyes lifted slowly toward him. "Already. People fold fast when consequences become real." He glanced briefly toward the rain outside before continuing. "She claims Jason pushed most of the planning." Claims. Such an ugly little word. Everybody starts rearranging guilt once handcuffs enter the room. I leaned back carefully against the booth while exhaustion settled deeper into my bones. "Did he say anything?" Dean exhaled quietly. Mostly denial at first. Then panic. Panic. I remembered Jason's face when the recording started playing between the candlelight and wine glasses. The exact moment performance disappeared and fear finally took over. Strange how quickly power changes hands once truth enters the room. "He asked to speak with you," Dean added carefully. Rainwater slid down the windows behind him in crooked silver lines while jazz music continued softly through the speakers like the restaurant itself had not fully realized a marriage just died inside booth 17. I stared at the empty chair across from me, where Jason sat earlier pretending to celebrate our anniversary. "No," I whispered. Dean studied me for another moment before nodding once. "That is probably smart." By the time I arrived home after midnight, the house felt colder than I remembered. Silent, too. Not peaceful silence. Abandoned silence. Jason's car was gone from the driveway. The porch light cast pale yellow shadows across wet pavement while wind rattled bare tree branches against the gutters overhead. I unlocked the front door slowly and stepped into darkness that still smelled faintly like Jason's cologne and the tomato soup I made yesterday afternoon before my life split in half. Funny how houses keep holding memories after trust leaves them. I slipped off my heels near the staircase and wandered quietly through each room. The living room lamp Jason always forgot to turn off still glowed softly beside the couch. His reading glasses rested exactly where he left them, near the fireplace. Upstairs, our bedroom remained untouched except for the slight dip in his pillow beside mine. 16 years together, and now every object looked like evidence from a stranger's life. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter around 1:30 in the morning. Tyler. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Mom. His voice sounded exhausted and terrified at the same time. Dean called me. Of course he did. I closed my eyes briefly and leaned against the kitchen counter while rain tapped softly against the windows again. I am okay, I whispered. Tyler exhaled shakily on the other end. Is it true? There are moments in life when truth feels too ugly to say out loud. This was one of them. I looked toward the dark hallway leading upstairs where family portraits still hung beneath warm wall lights. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, birthday parties. Jason smiling in every frame like love had always lived there naturally. Yes, I answered quietly. Silence stretched between us after that except for Tyler breathing unevenly somewhere hundreds of miles away in his Chicago apartment. I do not understand, he whispered finally. Neither did I. Not completely. Betrayal rarely arrives with satisfying explanations. Sometimes people simply become hollow enough to mistake greed for freedom. Tyler cleared his throat roughly before speaking again. Are you safe tonight? Safe. Such a simple word. I looked around the kitchen where I once baked birthday cakes and helped with homework and kissed my husband goodbye before work every morning for 16 years. The same kitchen where he planned my death beside another woman while rain tapped against the windows. Yes, I whispered slowly. I think I finally am. After the call ended, I stood alone in the silent house for a long time listening to the grandfather clock tick steadily in the hallway. The same clock that sounded like a countdown 2 nights earlier now sounded different somehow. Not threatening anymore. Just honest. I walked quietly upstairs toward the bedroom, stopped beside our wedding photograph hanging on the wall, and stared at the younger version of Jason smiling beside me beneath summer sunlight and white roses. Then I reached up slowly, removed the frame from the wall, and carried it downstairs without saying a word. By March, the divorce papers were finalized, and the house in Hartford no longer felt like mine even before I signed the last document. Funny how betrayal changes architecture. Rooms shrink differently after trust dies inside them. The kitchen where I once hosted Christmas dinners now felt staged and artificial, like a model home pretending to contain warmth. I sold the property 2 weeks later and moved to a small coastal town in Rhode Island where nobody knew my last name or recognized me from whispered conversations at charity galas. The cottage I rented sat 3 blocks from the water with pale blue shutters and a tiny front porch just wide enough for 2 rocking chairs and a cup of coffee in the mornings. Small place. Quiet place. The kind of place people move to after surviving something they cannot fully explain anymore. Spring arrived slowly along the coast that year. Cold ocean wind. Gray skies. Seagulls circling above fishing docks at sunrise while little cafes opened before dawn for local workers carrying thermoses and tired eyes. I found a part-time job at a bakery near the marina mostly because I needed routine more than money. The owner, an older woman named Ruth, never asked invasive questions. She simply handed me an apron my first morning and pointed toward trays of fresh blueberry muffins cooling beside the ovens. Sometimes kindness arrives quietly like that. No speeches, no pity, just space to breathe again. Tyler visited every other weekend after finishing his semester in Chicago. We walked along the shoreline together beneath cloudy skies while waves rolled against rocks and cold wind tangled my hair across my face. He never spoke much about Jason anymore. Neither did I. Some grief becomes too exhausted for conversation after a while. Jason eventually accepted a plea agreement according to Dean. Fraud charges. Conspiracy charges. Enough evidence existed between the recordings, forged signatures, pharmacy records, and Vanessa's statements that his lawyers advised cooperation immediately. Vanessa disappeared from public life altogether after the investigation became local news. Last I heard, she moved back to Arizona near her parents. Funny. For two people who planned an entirely new future together, they collapsed separately the second reality arrived. Dean called once near the end of April, while I sat outside the bakery watching rain drift across the harbor. "Jason wants to write you a letter," he said carefully. I stared at fishing boats rocking gently against the docks while gulls cried overhead in the distance. "Does he still think words fix this?" Dean stayed quiet for a second before answering softly. "I think prison finally forced him to sit alone with himself." Alone. There was a time I would have cried imagining Jason lonely somewhere. Now the feeling barely reached me at all. Healing is strange that way. Eventually, the absence of fear creates room where heartbreak used to live. "Tell him not to send it," I said quietly. There is nothing left to explain. After the call ended, I sat there listening to rain strike the harbor water while warm bread baked behind me inside the cafe kitchen. For the first time in months, silence no longer sounded threatening. It sounded earned. One Sunday morning in early June, I walked down to the beach before sunrise carrying coffee in a paper cup while the world still looked half asleep. The ocean stretched gray-blue beneath soft morning light, and cold wind moved gently through the dunes behind me. I slipped off my shoes near the shoreline and stood there letting freezing water wash lightly across my feet while gulls drifted overhead in slow circles. The bracelet Jason gave me during our anniversary dinner still rested inside my dresser drawer back at the cottage. I never threw it away, not because it still meant something romantic, because it reminded me how easily beautiful things can hide dangerous intentions underneath them. The difference now was simple. I no longer feared that truth. I understood it. A few minutes later, the sun finally pushed through the clouds low across the horizon, spilling gold across the water in long, trembling reflections. I closed my eyes and breathed in cold, salt air while waves rolled steadily against the shore. Somewhere behind me, the little town was beginning to wake up. Coffee brewing, doors opening, ordinary life continuing forward exactly the way it always does after tragedy leaves the room. And standing there barefoot beside the Atlantic Ocean with wind against my face and fear finally gone from my chest, I realized something unexpected. Jason and Vanessa never actually destroyed me. They only destroyed the version of me that believed love alone was enough to keep someone loyal. The woman they planned to bury disappeared that winter. But the woman standing on that beach at sunrise was finally alive.